the annals of human history, few deaths have been as shocking or as symbolically devastating as that of Roman Emperor Publius Linnæus Valerianus. His end was not merely the death of a man, but the ritualistic destruction of Roman dignity itself, carried out in the most horrific manner imaginable. The year was 260 CE, and the mighty Roman Empire, which had dominated the known world for centuries, was about to witness one of its darkest moments. The story of Valerian's demise is not just about one emperor's tragic fate, but about the collision of two great civilizations at the height of their power. It represents a turning point in ancient history where the seemingly invincible Roman war machine met its match in the rising Sassanid Persian Empire. What followed was a series of events that would haunt the Roman psyche for generations. When we speak of cruel deaths in antiquity, we often think of gladiatorial combat or public executions designed to entertain the masses. But Valerian's end was different. It was deeply personal, methodical, and designed to send a message that would echo across continents. The Persian king, Shapur I, didn't simply want to kill a Roman emperor. He wanted to destroy everything the title represented. The gruesome details of Valerian's death have been preserved in historical accounts that span cultures and centuries. Persian, Roman, and later Islamic historians all recorded variations of this horrific event, each adding their own cultural interpretation to what became one of history's most notorious executions. The consistency of these accounts across different civilizations speaks to the profound impact this single death had on the ancient world. Understanding Valerian's fate requires us to delve into a world where honor and humiliation were matters of state policy, where the treatment of captive rulers could shift the balance of power between empires. This was an era when symbolic gestures carried as much weight as military victories, and when the manner of a leader's death could determine the course of nations. The Roman Empire of the 3rd century was already showing signs of the crisis that would eventually lead to its transformation. Multiple emperors ruled simultaneously, barbarian tribes pressed at the borders, and economic instability plagued the provinces. Into this chaos stepped Valerian, a seasoned politician and military commander who believed he could restore Roman greatness through decisive action in the East. What he found instead was an opponent unlike any Rome had faced before, Persian king, who understood that true victory required not just military defeat, but the complete psychological destruction of one's enemies. Shapur I would achieve both, and in doing so would create a legacy of horror that still resonates today. The 3rd century CE marked what historians call the crisis of the 3rd century, period of near constant warfare, economic collapse, and political instability that brought the Roman Empire to the brink of dissolution. Between 235 and 284 CE, more than 20 emperors claimed the throne, most meeting violent ends within a few years of their ascension. The empire was fragmenting, with regional commanders declaring independence and foreign enemies pressing at every border. Into this maelstrom stepped Publius Linnæus Valerianus in 253 CE, ascending to power during one of Rome's darkest hours. Unlike many of the short-lived emperors who preceded him, Valerian brought substantial experience to the throne. He had served as a respected senator, held multiple provincial commands, and was known for his administrative competence and military acumen. Many Romans saw him as the steady hand needed to guide the empire through its crisis. Valerian's approach to imperial governance reflected the pragmatic thinking of a seasoned politician, recognizing that The empire was too vast for one man to control effectively. He appointed his son Gallienus as co-emperor, dividing responsibilities between them. Valerian would handle the critical eastern frontier where the rising Sassanid Persian Empire posed an increasingly serious threat, while Gallienus would manage the western provinces and the Germanic invasions along the Rhine. The eastern territories had always been among Rome's most valuable possessions, providing crucial tax revenue and serving as a buffer against Persian expansion. Syria, in particular, was a jewel of the empire with its prosperous cities and strategic trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to Asia. The loss of these territories would not only represent a military disaster but an economic catastrophe that could precipitate the empire's final collapse. Valerian understood that the Persian threat required immediate and decisive action. The Sassanid dynasty, which had overthrown the Parthians in 224 CE, had proven far more aggressive and organizationally sophisticated than their predecessors. Under Ardeshir the Firm and his successor Shapur throne, the Persians had already captured several Roman cities and were actively encouraging rebellion among Rome's eastern vassals. The emperor's decision to personally lead the eastern campaign reflected both his military background and his understanding of the symbolic importance of imperial presence in times of crisis. Roman armies had always fought more effectively when led by the emperor himself, and Valerian believed that his presence would inspire the troops while demonstrating Roman resolve to both allies and enemies. However, the challenges facing Valerian in the east were unlike anything Rome had previously encountered. The Sassanid Persians were not merely another barbarian tribe to be pacified or bought off with subsidies. They represented a sophisticated civilization with their own imperial ambitions, advanced military technology, and a religious ideology that positioned them as the rightful heirs to the ancient Persian Empire of Cyrus and Darius. Shapur I, known in Persian as Shahan Shah or King of Kings, ascended to the Sassanid throne around 240 CE, with ambitions that would reshape the ancient world. Unlike his father, Ardeshir, who had focused primarily on consolidating Sassanid control over traditional Persian territories, Shapur possessed a grand vision of Persian expansion that directly challenged Roman dominance in the Near East. He was a ruler who combined military genius with a deep understanding of propaganda and psychological warfare. The new Persian king had grown up during his father's campaigns against the declining Parthian Empire and had witnessed firsthand how effective organization and innovative tactics could overcome seemingly superior forces. From his earliest years, Shapur was groomed not just to rule but to expand Persian power beyond anything achieved since the days of the Achaemenid Empire. His education combined traditional Persian military arts with lessons learned from observing Roman administrative methods and Greek philosophical traditions. Shapur's military innovations would prove decisive in his conflicts with Rome. He modernized the Persian army by incorporating new siege technologies, improving cavalry tactics, and developing a more professional officer corps. Most importantly, he understood that defeating Rome required more than just winning battles. It demanded the systematic destruction of Roman prestige and the symbols of imperial power. This insight would prove crucial in his treatment of captured Roman officials. The Persian king's early campaigns against Rome achieved remarkable success, capturing the important cities of Nisibis and Carrhae and demonstrating that the Sassanid military could not only match Roman legions in open battle, but could also conduct sophisticated siege operations. These victories provided Shapur with valuable experience in Roman military methods while also yielding substantial treasure and prisoners that could be used to fund further expansion. Persian sources from the period described Shapur as a ruler of exceptional personal charisma and intellectual curiosity. He patronized scholars, artists, and architects, transforming his capital at Ctesiphon into a center of learning that rivaled anything in the Roman world. This cultural sophistication would later influence his treatment of high-ranking Roman prisoners whom he often viewed as valuable sources of information about Roman administrative and military practices. The religious dimension of Shapur's rule cannot be overlooked in understanding his later actions toward Valerian. As a Zoroastrian ruler, Shapur saw himself as the champion of cosmic order against the forces of chaos and darkness. Roman Christianity, which was gaining strength during this period, represented to many Persians a foreign ideology that threatened traditional Persian values. This religious conflict would add an additional layer of meaning to the ritualistic aspects of Valerian's eventual fate. By the time Valerian arrived in the East, Shapur had already established himself as Rome's most dangerous enemy since Hannibal. His combination of military skill, political acumen, and psychological insight made him uniquely qualified to exploit Roman weaknesses. The stage was set for a confrontation that would end not just in military defeat, but in a humiliation that would haunt the Roman Empire for centuries. Emperor Valerian's Eastern campaign began in 256 CE with high hopes and considerable fanfare. The imperial court proclaimed this expedition as the definitive solution to the Persian problem, with propaganda emphasizing Valerian's extensive military experience and the elite quality of the legions accompanying him. The emperor assembled what many contemporaries considered the finest Roman army of the 3rd century, drawing troops from across the empire and including veteran formations that had proven themselves in previous Eastern campaigns. The initial phases of the campaign showed promise, with Roman forces successfully relieving several besieged cities and restoring imperial control over disputed territories in northern Mesopotamia. Valerian's methodical approach to warfare, emphasizing careful logistics and coordinated movements, seemed well suited to the challenges of Eastern campaigning. Persian forces initially avoided major confrontations, leading many Romans to believe that Shapur was intimidated by the size and quality of the imperial army. However, the Persian strategy was far more sophisticated than Roman commanders realized. Shapur was deliberately drawing the Roman army deeper into Persian-controlled territory, extending their supply lines, while avoiding the kind of decisive battle that had traditionally favored Roman military superiority. The Persian king understood that time was on his side. The longer the Romans remained in hostile territory, the more vulnerable they became to disease, supply shortages, and the gradual attrition that had defeated previous Roman expeditions. The first serious problems began to manifest during the siege of Nisibis, a strategically important city that controlled key trade routes between the Roman and Persian empires. What should have been a straightforward siege operation dragged on for months, with Persian relief forces conducting a sophisticated campaign of harassment that prevented the Romans from establishing effective siege lines. Meanwhile, disease began to spread through the Roman camp, weakening the army's fighting capacity. Contemporary sources describe a gradual deterioration in Roman morale as the campaign progressed. The army that had begun the expedition with such confidence found itself engaged in an increasingly frustrating war of attrition against an enemy that refused to fight on Roman terms. Shapur's forces seemed to appear and disappear at will, striking at Roman supply convoys and isolated detachments before melting away into the Persian countryside. The situation became critical when plague broke out among the Roman forces. This was likely the same epidemic that historians call the Plague of Cyprine, which was devastating urban populations across the empire during this period. In the confined conditions of a military camp, the disease spread, rapidly killing thousands of soldiers and leaving many others too weak to fight effectively. Valerian himself may have contracted the illness, though ancient sources are unclear on this point. By 260 CE, the Roman position had become desperate. The army was decimated by disease, running low on supplies, and surrounded by increasingly confident Persian forces. It was at this moment of maximum vulnerability that Shapur chose to spring his trap, launching a coordinated assault that would result in one of the most catastrophic defeats in Roman military history. The Great Eastern Campaign that was supposed to restore Roman dominance would instead become the prelude to an emperor's nightmare. The exact circumstances of Emperor Valerian's capture remain one of the most debated episodes in ancient military history, with sources providing conflicting accounts of how the mighty Roman ruler fell into Persian hands. What emerges from the various testimonies is a picture of desperation, miscalculation, and the cruel irony of a leader who sought to negotiate his way out of an impossible situation only to deliver himself to his enemies. According to the most widely accepted account, Valerian, facing the complete collapse of his military position, made the fateful decision to request a meeting with Shapur under the pretense of negotiating terms for Roman withdrawal from Persian territory. This decision reflected either desperate hope or a fundamental misunderstanding of his opponent's character. The emperor may have believed that his imperial dignity would protect him during such negotiations, or that the traditional customs of warfare would ensure his safe conduct. The meeting itself was arranged to take place on neutral ground between the two armies, with both sides bringing small retinues to demonstrate their peaceful intentions. Contemporary sources describe the elaborate protocols surrounding this encounter, with Persian officials insisting on specific ceremonial arrangements that should have warned Roman advisors of potential treachery. However, the desperate circumstances of the Roman position left Valerian with few alternatives. When the emperor arrived at the designated meeting place, accompanied by a small group of senior officers and bodyguards, he found himself facing not just Shapur, but a carefully prepared trap. Persian sources later claimed that Valerian had come to surrender unconditionally, while Roman accounts insisted that he had come to negotiate an honorable withdrawal. The truth likely lies somewhere between these positions, with the emperor hoping to salvage something from a disastrous campaign. The moment of capture itself was swift and decisive. Persian guards, who had been positioned strategically around the meeting site, moved simultaneously to surround the Roman delegation. Valerian's bodyguards, outnumbered and caught off guard, were quickly overwhelmed. Some sources suggest that the emperor himself attempted to resist, drawing his sword in a final gesture of defiance, but the outcome was never in doubt. The psychological impact of the emperor's capture was immediate and devastating. Roman troops, learning that their supreme commander had been taken prisoner, began to surrender in large numbers or attempt to flee toward Roman territory. The carefully constructed military hierarchy that held the Roman army together collapsed within hours of Valerian's capture, transforming an organized retreat into a chaotic rout. Shapur's treatment of his imperial prisoner in the immediate aftermath of the capture set the tone for what was to follow. Rather than executing Valerian immediately, as might have been expected, the Persian king chose to preserve his prize for a more elaborate and symbolically significant fate. The captured emperor was stripped of his imperial regalia and bound, but kept alive as a living trophy of Persian victory over Rome. The period of Valerian's captivity that followed his capture lasted several years and represented a carefully orchestrated campaign of psychological warfare, designed not just to humiliate the individual emperor but to destroy the mystique of Roman imperial power itself. Shapur, that I understood that possessing a living Roman emperor provided opportunities for propaganda and symbolic victory that far exceeded the simple military triumph of his capture. Contemporary Persian sources, later confirmed by Roman historians, describe how Valerian was subjected to a series of increasingly degrading treatments designed to demonstrate Persian superiority over Rome. The former Emperor was reportedly used as a human foot tool when Shapur mounted his horse, a deliberate inversion of the imperial ceremony where subjects knelt before the Roman ruler. This image was subsequently depicted in Persian art and architecture, ensuring that the humiliation would be preserved for posterity. The symbolism of these humiliations extended far beyond personal cruelty. In the ancient world, the treatment of captured rulers carried profound political significance, communicating messages about the relative power of different civilizations. By reducing the Roman emperor to the status of a servant or plaything, Shapur was effectively declaring that Persian civilization had superseded Roman authority in the ancient world's hierarchy of nations. Living conditions for the captive emperor were carefully calibrated to maintain his physical health while destroying his dignity. Valerian was reportedly kept in comfortable quarters, but was required to wear the clothes of a common servant rather than imperial robes. He was fed adequately but from simple pottery rather than the gold and silver vessels befitting an emperor. Every aspect of his treatment reinforced his fallen status while keeping him alive for whatever final purpose Shapur had in mind. The psychological torture extended beyond physical humiliation to include forced participation in Persian religious ceremonies and cultural practices that would have been deeply offensive to Roman sensibilities. Some sources suggest that Valerian was compelled to attend Zoroastrian fire ceremonies and to perform ritual acts of submission before Persian deities. Though the reliability of these accounts is debated by modern historians, Persian craftsmen and artists were commissioned to create permanent records of the emperor's humiliation, producing sculptures, paintings, and decorative objects that depicted Valerian in various states of subjugation. These artistic works served multiple purposes. They provided immediate propaganda value for Persian audiences, demonstrated Persian cultural sophistication to foreign visitors, and created lasting monuments to Persian victory that would outlive both Shapur and his captive. The impact of news about Valerian's treatment resonated throughout the Roman Empire, where reports of the emperor's humiliation created a crisis of confidence in imperial institutions. Romans had grown accustomed to military defeats and even the deaths of emperors, but the spectacle of a living emperor reduced to servitude represented something unprecedented in their historical experience. The psychological wound inflicted by these accounts would influence Roman foreign policy and military strategy for generations to come. The decision to end Valerian's life appears to have been made when the captive emperor's health began to deteriorate noticeably, suggesting that Shapur had been deliberately keeping him alive for a specific purpose that required careful timing. Persian sources indicate that the king wanted Valerian to be conscious and aware during his final moments, which ruled out allowing him to die naturally from illness or old age. The method chosen for the emperor's execution would become one of history's most notorious examples of ritualized cruelty. The process of flaying alive, known in Persian as removing the skin, was not merely an execution method but a religious and symbolic ritual with deep significance in Zoroastrian and pre-Zoroastrian Persian traditions. The removal of skin was associated with concepts of spiritual purification and the separation of the soul from worldly corruption. By subjecting Valerian to this particular death, Shapur was not only inflicting maximum physical suffering but also making a religious statement about the spiritual cleansing of Persian territory from Roman contamination. Preparation for the execution reportedly took several days, during which time Valerian was subjected to various preliminary rituals designed to prepare him for what was to come. These included forced bathing, the shaving of his head and body hair, and the application of substances that would make the skin easier to remove. The methodical nature of these preparations suggests that the execution was planned as a public spectacle rather than a private act of revenge. The actual flaying process began with careful incisions made by skilled Persian executioners who had been trained in the precise techniques required to remove human skin while keeping the victim alive for as long as possible. The procedure typically started with the extremities, fingers, toes, and facial features before progressing to larger areas of the body. Contemporary accounts suggest that the process was designed to take several hours, maximizing both the victim's suffering and the psychological impact on witnesses. Throughout the ordeal, Valerian was reportedly conscious and aware, his cries and pleas for mercy serving as a final demonstration of Roman vulnerability. Persian nobles and foreign ambassadors were required to witness the execution, ensuring that news of the emperor's fate would spread quickly throughout the known world. The spectacle was designed to send an unmistakable message about the consequences of challenging Persian power. The emperor's death, when it finally came, was likely the result of shock and blood loss rather than any single catastrophic injury. The skilled executioners would have known how to prolong the process while ensuring that it ended within a reasonable time frame. The moment of death itself was reportedly marked by Persian religious ceremonies designed to purify the execution site and to offer thanks to Ahura Mazda for delivering the enemy into Persian hands. The immediate aftermath of the execution saw Valerian's body subjected to additional indignities designed to prevent any possibility of Roman recovery or proper burial. The corpse was reportedly dismembered and different parts distributed to various Persian nobles as trophies, ensuring that no single location could become a shrine or focus for Roman attempts at revenge. This final desecration completed the systematic destruction of imperial dignity that had begun with Valerian's capture years earlier. The preservation and display of Valerian's skin represented the culmination of Shapur's psychological warfare campaign against Rome, transforming the physical remains of the Roman emperor into a permanent monument to Persian victory. The process of preparing human skin for long-term preservation required considerable skill and knowledge, suggesting that Persian craftsmen had previous experience with such macabre trophies or had developed techniques specifically for this purpose. Contemporary sources describe how the emperor's skin was carefully treated with various chemicals and processes to prevent decay and maintain its recognizable human appearance. The preservation methods likely combined traditional Persian leatherwork techniques with specialized knowledge of human anatomy. The result was a grotesque but durable artifact that could withstand the climate and handling required for public display. The treated skin was reportedly stuffed with straw or similar material to maintain a human-like shape, creating what amounted to a life-sized effigy of the former emperor. This effigy was then dressed in mock imperial regalia, a cruel parody of Roman imperial costume that emphasized the contrast between Valerian's former dignity and his current state. The visual impact of this display would have been profoundly disturbing to anyone familiar with Roman imperial symbolism. Shapur ordered the skin trophy to be displayed in the most prominent temple in his capital city, where it would be visible to the maximum number of people, including foreign ambassadors and dignitaries. The location was carefully chosen to ensure that the trophy would serve its intended function as a diplomatic message. Every visitor to the Persian court would be confronted with this tangible evidence of Roman defeat and humiliation. The psychological impact of the skin trophy extended far beyond its immediate shock value. For Persian audiences, it represented divine approval of their king's victory over the enemies of Zoroastrianism. For Romans and other foreigners, it served as a stark warning about the consequences of challenging Persian power. The trophy effectively communicated that Shapur was capable of actions that went far beyond conventional military victory. Persian sources suggest that the skin trophy became a central element in court ceremonies and religious festivals, with elaborate rituals developing around its display and veneration. These ceremonies served to reinforce the religious significance of Shapur's victory while providing regular opportunities to showcase Persian dominance over Rome. The trophy thus became not just a static display but an active element in Persian political and religious life. The longevity of the skin trophy is uncertain, with various sources providing conflicting accounts of how long it remained on display. Some suggest it was preserved for decades, becoming a fixture of Persian court life that outlasted both Shapur and his immediate successors. Others indicate that it eventually deteriorated despite preservation efforts, though even its destruction would have been handled with ceremony befitting its symbolic importance to Persian imperial ideology. News of Valerian's capture and gruesome death reached Rome several months after. The events themselves carried by refugees from the Eastern armies and confirmed by Persian messengers who had been specifically instructed to spread word of the emperor's fate. The initial reaction in the capital was one of disbelief. Many Romans simply could not accept that such a fate could befall a Roman emperor. The Senate initially suppressed the most graphic details while attempting to determine the accuracy of the reports. Co-emperor Gallienus, Valerian's son, faced an impossible situation upon learning of his father's death. While he needed to acknowledge the loss in order to maintain his own legitimacy as sole emperor, he also had to manage the devastating impact that news of Valerian's fate would have on Roman morale and imperial prestige. His response combined public mourning with determined efforts to prevent the story from undermining Roman confidence in their military and political institutions. The official Roman position, as articulated by Gallienus and the Senate, emphasized Valerian's heroic resistance and attempted to downplay the more humiliating aspects of his captivity and death. Imperial propaganda portrayed the emperor as a martyr who had died fighting for Rome's eastern interests, carefully omitting details about his years of servitude and the manner of his execution. However, these efforts at damage control proved largely unsuccessful as more detailed accounts continued to circulate throughout the empire. The psychological impact on Roman military forces was immediate and severe. Eastern legions that had escaped the disaster began to exhibit signs of demoralization and reduced fighting effectiveness. The knowledge that their supreme commander had suffered such a fate created a crisis of confidence that affected everything from recruitment to strategic planning. Many soldiers began to question whether Roman military superiority was merely a myth that Persian competence had finally exposed. Roman diplomatic efforts to recover Valerian's remains or negotiate for proper burial were repeatedly rebuffed by Persian officials who clearly understood the continuing propaganda value of maintaining control over the emperor's body. These failures further emphasized Roman impotence in the face of Persian power and provided Shapur with additional opportunities to humiliate Roman representatives who attempted to approach him. The broader strategic consequences of Valerian's fate extended far beyond the immediate loss of the emperor himself. Persian victory had demonstrated that Roman power was not invincible, encouraging other enemies of Rome to adopt more aggressive postures. Germanic tribes along the northern frontier, African kingdoms to the south, and various barbarian confederations all began to recalculate their relationships with Rome based on this evidence of imperial vulnerability within the empire itself. Valerian's death contributed to the ongoing political crisis that characterized the 3rd century. Multiple claimants to imperial authority used the disaster as evidence of Gallienus' unfitness to rule, leading to civil wars that further weakened Roman military capacity. The empire's eastern provinces left largely defenseless. After the destruction of Valerian's army fell under Persian influence or direct control, representing the loss of some of Rome's most valuable territories. The story of Valerian's death transcended its immediate historical context to become one of the most enduring cautionary tales in the ancient world, influencing military, diplomatic, and cultural practices for centuries after the events themselves. The account spread far beyond the Roman and Persian empires, reaching audiences in India, China, and Northern Europe, where it served as a stark reminder of the brutal realities of ancient warfare and the fates that could await even the most powerful rulers. Roman historians and writers grappled with Valerian's fate for generations, attempting to understand how such a disaster could have befallen their empire and what lessons could be drawn from the catastrophe. Authors like Ammianus, Marcellinus, and later chroniclers used the story as an example of the dangers of overconfidence and the importance of understanding one's enemies. The tale became a standard element in Roman military education used to illustrate the consequences of strategic miscalculation, the psychological impact of Valerian's death on Roman imperial ideology was profound and lasting. Future emperors became notably more cautious about personally leading Eastern campaigns, preferring to delegate such dangerous assignments to subordinate generals who could be sacrificed if necessary without the same catastrophic impact on imperial prestige. This shift in imperial behavior represented a fundamental acknowledgement that Roman power had limits that earlier generations had refused to recognize. Persian cultural traditions preserved and elaborated on the story of Valerian's death, transforming it into a foundational myth of Sassanid imperial ideology. Persian poets and storytellers developed increasingly elaborate versions of the tale, emphasizing Shapur's wisdom and divine favor while portraying Valerian as the embodiment of foreign arrogance and corruption. These cultural products helped establish the Sassanid dynasty's legitimacy and provided a model for dealing with future Roman threats. The influence of Valerian's story extended into the religious sphere, where both Christian and Zoroastrian writers incorporated elements of the narrative into their theological frameworks. Christian authors used the emperor's fate as an example of divine judgment against persecutors of the faith, while Zoroastrian texts portrayed Shapur's victory as evidence of Ahura Mazda's support for the righteous. These religious interpretations gave the story additional layers of meaning and ensured its preservation in sacred as well as secular literature. Medieval and early modern European writers rediscovered Valerian's story through classical sources and incorporated it into their own historical and literary works. The tale became a popular subject for moralistic treatises about the dangers of pride and the transience of earthly power. Renaissance artists created paintings and sculptures depicting various scenes from Valerian's captivity and death, ensuring that the visual impact of the story continued to resonate with new audiences. Modern historians have used Valerian's fate as a case study in the intersection of military history, diplomatic practice, and cultural psychology. The story illustrates how individual events can have consequences far beyond their immediate participants, reshaping the political landscape and influencing the behavior of nations for generations. Archaeological discoveries in both former Roman and Persian territories continue to provide new insights into how contemporary populations understood and remembered these events, demonstrating the lasting impact of what happened to one man in the deserts of Mesopotamia over 17 centuries ago. The death of Emperor Valerian stands as one of history's most stark reminders that no individual, regardless of their power or position, is immune to the brutal realities of human cruelty and political calculation. His fate represents the intersection of personal tragedy and historical transformation, where the suffering of one man became a symbol of shifting power dynamics that would reshape the ancient world. The echoes of his screams, recorded by historians across cultures and centuries, continue to resonate as a testament to both human capacity for inflicting suffering and the fragility of even the mightiest empires. What makes Valerian's story particularly haunting is not simply the physical horror of his death, but the methodical nature of his degradation and the calculated way in which his suffering was transformed into a tool of statecraft. Shapur I's treatment of his captive emperor revealed a sophisticated understanding of psychological warfare that went far beyond mere military victory. The Persian king recognized that true conquest required not just the defeat of armies, but the destruction of the symbols and beliefs that gave an empire its cohesion and strength. The systematic humiliation that preceded Valerian's death, the years of servitude, the forced participation in foreign rituals, the use of his body as a foot tool represented a form of warfare that targeted not just physical territory but the collective psyche of an entire civilization. In reducing the most powerful man in the Roman world to the status of an object, Shapur achieved a victory that no amount of military success could have equaled. The image of the Roman emperor's skin displayed as a trophy in a Persian temple became a more potent weapon against Roman morale than any number of defeated legions. The story also reveals the dangerous intersection of personal pride and political necessity that has destroyed countless leaders throughout history. Valerian's decision to meet with Shapur under the pretense of negotiation reflected the kind of desperation that clouds judgment and leads to catastrophic miscalculation. His fate serves as a reminder that in the arena of international conflict, good intentions and diplomatic immunity offer no protection against opponents who operate by different rules and hold different values. Perhaps most disturbing is the way Valerian's death demonstrates how individual human suffering can be transformed into collective political meaning. The emperor's personal agony became a symbol that transcended his individual experience, influencing the behavior of nations and the course of empires. His screams became propaganda, his skin became a diplomatic message, and his memory became a tool for both inspiring and intimidating future generations. The transformation of human suffering into political capital reveals something profoundly troubling about the nature of power and the prices that civilizations are willing to pay for dominance. The enduring fascination with Valerian's story across cultures and centuries suggests that it touches on fundamental anxieties about vulnerability, mortality, and the limits of human power. In an age when technology has made us seemingly more secure and connected than ever before, the tale of an emperor flayed alive reminds us that beneath the veneer of civilization lie the same brutal realities that have always governed human conflict. The Persian palace where Valerian's skin was displayed has long since crumbled to dust, but the warning embedded in his fate continues to echo through time. Modern readers may be tempted to view Valerian's death as a relic of a more barbarous age, a reminder of how far human civilization has advanced since the 3rd century CE. Yet the fundamental dynamics that led to his fate, the collision of competing empires, the transformation of individuals into symbols, the use of cruelty as a tool of statecraft remain disturbingly relevant in our contemporary world. The methods may have evolved, but the underlying human capacity for inflicting systematic suffering in service of political goals has not disappeared. The true horror of Valerian's death lies not in its uniqueness, but in its representation of possibilities that lurk within all human societies and all historical periods. His story serves as a warning that the veneer of civilization is thinner than we like to believe, and that the distance between a palace and a torture chamber is often measured not in miles, but in the decisions of individuals who wield power over others. In remembering Valerian's fate, we honor not just the memory of a man who died in unimaginable agony, but the necessity of remaining vigilant against the forces that could transform any of us from rulers of our fate into victims of history's darkest impulses.